Welcome back to the 256th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including talking about the the protests that have been happening at UT Austin and how in Texas that sort of thing doesn't fly compared to Columbia, and an article talking about the lowering of standards in our democracy. I honestly don't know how to frame it. It's a really interesting article. So we'll jump into those two. We're only going to do two today. It's going to be a little bit shorter than normal. I am moving, or in the process of moving today and tomorrow. So sorry that you don't get your normal 3 stories, but I'll find a way to rant about these for a little bit longer. It'll probably be close to the normal amount of time. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So there are 2 different approaches to some of the protests, riots, encampments that have been going on across the nation on college campuses and major cities. And one of them is the Texas approach, or the red state approach, Florida approach, whatever you want to call it. And then there is the blue state, Columbia approach. One is a lot more hands-on, is probably a nice euphemistic way to say it. A lot more, hey, you're not allowed to do this. We're going to shut you down. We're not going to let this stand, versus, hey, we're going to let you air your grievances and put them out there in the world. If you disturb something, that's when we're going to have an issue with it. Otherwise, go about your day. And maybe that's a little unfair to one position or the other. You can tell me what your opinions are, because that's the whole point of this daily debate. What are your opinions about the different approaches? Did I mischaracterize them? So on and so forth. Love to hear what everybody has to say. So, with that said, and with that really divisive question raised at the very beginning, let's jump into our first article that comes from National Review. And I will have the link in the description, as per always, underneath the like and subscribe button, but this one is a National Review Plus article, so if you try to pull it up on the computer, it might be a little hard. I would suggest going through a third-party app like Flipboard, maybe Apple News you could get through there. Those apps sometimes allow you to view some of these articles without having to go through the paywall, but not suggesting that you don't go through the paywall, because at the end of the day, pay these people for their content. Great. I'm just saying that there are ways to view it without having to pay the subscription. Sometimes you also just get free articles, so there are lots of different ways. But pay the people who make these articles and put their opinion out there. So the headline from this one reads, quote, "Don't Columbia my Texas." And this plays on the overall theme, which is don't California my Texas, don't California my Tennessee, don't California my Florida. The whole joke of people who were leaving California or leaving New York or some other areas that weren't doing so well, that were cracking down pretty hard during the COVID times, and all those people moved away to different places. And when it came to the red states that were taking in some of these more, I don't want to say liberal, but maybe formerly liberal, or at least people coming from areas that are notoriously liberal, the whole joke was, hey, don't bring your politics here with me or with you to our beautiful new state that you're a resident in. And now they're playing on this trope for the UT Austin protesters as well. So I don't think I could do any more justice to this author's opinion by trying to summarize it. I'm just going to read you what they say, at least for the first 2 paragraphs or so you get an idea of where they're coming from. Quote, "Student radicals and outside agitators who had watched the university administrators capitulate to mob tactics at Columbia, Yale, and other universities thought they could get away with the same antics in Texas. Boy, were they wrong. When pro-Hamas protesters descended upon the University of Texas at Austin on Wednesday, they did not have the free rein to disrupt campus life that they have enjoyed elsewhere. Instead, they were met with a massive show of force that should serve as an example to other schools struggling to quell unauthorized protests on their campus." And this is one of the many arguments that you've been hearing from this article, other articles I've read, as well as the commentary that these protests are violating place, time, manner restrictions. So a great example that I have been able to talk about, or I can talk about from personal experience. So if you go to the University of Kentucky, you can have a protest, or you can have some sort of visual symbol or some sort of solidarity, whatever you want to call it. You are able to go out there basically anytime within the public area and do what you're going to do. And let's be clear, there are a few restrictions. They have specific areas that they like people to do certain things, which to some degree, like free speech zones and those sort of things are technically unconstitutional, but we won't get into that here. But the idea is that they're going to have a special place for it. You should notify them ahead of time. They want to make sure that in the case that I know about, they specifically said, hey, we want you to have security there. So then if anybody tries to come at you, if you do anything stupid, then security will be there to protect the other people, so on and so forth. So whether or not you think these are actual good policies in order to protect people versus limit their free speech prospectively, I think it is a fine line there, and I don't want to degrade anybody's job, because some administrators probably don't want to degrade people's freedom of speech. They hear some of these arguments about making sure that the citizens that may come onto campus, the students who are paying to be there, that they're actually protected, and that's why they have some of these restrictions, so nobody gets into any crazy fights. Everybody feels protected and safe to express themselves. Sure, I'm sure there are lots of good reasons, but also at the same time, you're putting in a lot of barriers in order to make sure that somebody's able to speak freely and make sure that their opinion is heard on campus. But the one that I definitely agreed with, the one policy I can speak about personally that I definitely agreed with, is they actually wouldn't let you have a megaphone. And, well, technically you could have a megaphone, but not during class time, because that would be a major disturbance to anybody else in the classes, and they wouldn't be able to get their work done. Now, let's be clear. On free speech grounds, I don't agree. You should be able to have a megaphone. But based on the other ideas that, hey, you're not actually it's not just you in this space, it's other people in this space that have to use this space, I think maybe you could make an argument on that grounds. I don't like it, but at least I understood the rationale more than I understood the, hey, you have to stand in this exact particular spot rationale. Because at the end of the day, you probably should try to be respectful to other people, especially when expressing your political opinion. Now, the question becomes, is protest allowed to disturb other people's days? Is it allowed to break up their routine? There are some people who will argue, and I've heard this one before. I've even heard one from one of my professors back in the day, that protests and riots are an acceptable form of political disobedience, and that they should actually be okay. And I'm like, that's a little bit far, because you're taking the point where, hey, you can actually disturb somebody else's time. You can disturb their routine. You can get in their way. You're taking that to a whole nother extreme. It's not just saying that you can disturb the way that other people interact in the world, and you can block a bridge or something to this effect, which I think you could still make an argument for, but I'll get into that here in a second. But the professor's perspective basically says, no, you're actually able to damage other people's property in order to make your point, because that's what rioting will be. And I was like, really? That seems a little bit too far to me. But the idea that I was getting at here, which is you actually are not allowed to disturb other people as they're going around doing things, isn't that kind of the point of a protest? It's in order to disturb everybody else who's going about their day. Maybe you're a person who is really passionate about the chicken salad at the diner on campus, and they say, okay, you can't actually have a megaphone. You just have to stand there with your poster board and scream, say out loud, the chicken salad's outrageous. Like, that's one thing that will make people pay attention. If you have a bullhorn and you're out there and you're getting in, not in their face, but you're making it so loud and obnoxious that they can't really just pass you by without noticing, guess what? You're probably going to piss some people off, and that's actually should be your right. You should be able to piss them off, and then they're going to say, no, I'm not going to vote for your proposal. You're ruining my day. but also that has the ability to get your message out further, and people are actually listening now rather than being obsessed in their own world. I think we could have a genuine conversation about that. And does that mean that it's okay? Does it mean, like, should that be a acceptable thing to do? But that also the question that becomes, is that necessarily something that should be illegal? And I think there's actually a good mix here, because I've heard some opinions about civil disobedience. So I think it should be completely acceptable and within the norms of protesting that you can do those sort of things, even if they break a law in a very, let's be clear, these are not going to be like felonies. They might even be misdemeanors. They might just be, small time cases that come your way. They probably will be misdemeanors in most places, but not always. And they're just like civil disobedience charges. So guess what? You are passionate enough about your thing, whatever it may be, whatever you're protesting, and then guess what? You get arrested. That's part of the process. People that block streets, they get arrested all the time, and they're saying, hey, I'm willing to go to jail for my efforts, and that's actually part of the protesting process. I think there's actually a very good balance there. So the question that becomes with these UT Austin protests is, did they violate the time, place, manner restrictions that were put on them? And people on one side are saying, yes, they most definitely did. The other side saying it's not okay. And the reason they're saying that is because the other side of the argument, were these time, place, manner restrictions actually reasonable? And I think that's something else that's going to there's going to have to be a serious conversation about that, because one side is very happy to have these rules on the books and have them enforced, and the other side is saying, no, these rules actually need to be changed. So whether or not these protesters were actually allowed to be arrested, and let's be clear, this will still be litigated in the court of public opinion. Still more things are going to come out. But from my basic understanding now is that all of them had violated time, place, and manner, or at least a majority of them. And now the question is not whether or not they violated the law, whether or not they're standing up for what they believe in, because they are, and they're willing to get arrested for it, which if you're willing to protest for it, get a little bit of civil disobedience, it'll be like a slap on the wrist because you're doing your duty. You're not rioting. You're not trying to be violent. You're not trying to do X, Y, Z, so on and so forth. And let's be clear, there are always exceptions to the rule, and some people will claim that the entire movement is violent. But that's not the point here. I'm talking broadly about protesting. And that means the conversation now will become, are these time, place, and manner restrictions too strict? Are they actually enforceable in this particular instance? That's what it will come down to, not whether or not the people did their job as they should be doing it. The argument is actually that people in other places besides UT Austin are not enforcing laws that are on the books, or they may have more lax laws. So that's why I think this outrage about the UT Austin stuff is kind of, I don't want to say stupid, because it speaks more to the political movement on one side of the aisle, the pro-Israel or the pro-Palestinian. It does really highlight the tension here, the outrage on either side, the willingness of either side to do whatever it takes in order to make sure that their perspective comes out on top. It is definitely an interesting moment, but the outrage about them actually getting arrested, I think from what I've seen so far, it's been pretty on point within the legal framework. Now, then again, things can always change. Allegations can come out. Maybe I need to go to a different news source. That's all possible. But that's my take on it so far. And that's why I think the conversation about these time, place, manner restrictions needs to be reviewed. Because it's not even just about these particular issues. We need to make sure that these are the least restrictive as possible, if not non-existent, if we can get away with it while still not disturbing other people's days, or at least having that on the book so that they can be arrested, but then still being a form of civil disobedience. Because at the end of the day, any rule that is going to restrict you from voicing your opinion, even in protest, even in association with other people in a group, that could be used in a terrible way in the future. And you need to consider, if your political movement, if your political bona fides, if your issue that you care about the most comes up and it could actually negatively affect you getting out there and showing your support for your movement. It's one of those things where we have to have a base conversation, not the, oh, are these people morally justified? No, that is the top line conversation. We need to have the bottom line conversation, because guess what? We can play out the morality on top or bottom. We're not going to solve it. Everybody who's arguing one side or another, they're basically dug in at this point. The protesters aren't going to have their minds changed. The commentariat or some of the other people who are getting involved, the other counter-protesters, they're not going to have their mind changed. We need to make sure we're talking about the base issues and that things don't get, we don't get hoodwinked because we're pretending that we're talking about the top-line issues. We're talking about, oh, this is pro-Israel, pro-Israel, pro-Hamas, whatever talking point you want to use on that side, pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, whatever talking point you want to use on that side. And yes, I'm just using them all as talking points because you hear these terms thrown around a lot. Don't let that distract you from the base issue, which is the components of free speech that could be changed or altered, or at least proposed to be changed based on any of the positions that are on that top line with the glossy words that catch the headlines. That's how things change. Guess what? After 9/11, and I'm going to this not because I'm trying to evoke 9/11 as like, oh, click, whatever. No. After 9/11, the argument didn't actually became about American security, but it became less about that when they were taking rights away, when they were limiting the American people's ability to have oversight over the government, when they were increasing the surveillance powers. It was about terrorism. It was about the potential of terrorists coming in, attacking this nation. And that is a fair concern. But it was also a blanket. It was the top line, flashy issue versus the bottom line, American security. And not just security from other people outside, but also security internally and American people's data security, information security, privacy rights. That was the underlying issue. And then they were using the top line issue to change policy below it. And we just accepted it because we fell into agreeing with the narrative rather than looking at the underlying. So remember here, the underlying is First Amendment rights, whether it be speech, protest, assembly, so on and so forth. Don't let the flashy headlines, and no matter how much emotional appeal any of those have for you, don't let them suck you in and then justify violating, changing, altering any of these rights in a way that is not within the bounds of the Constitution. So, I'm just saying, because this is going to be a wide conversation from now on. We're going to have new rules about protests on campuses. We're going to have more pushback from a commentariat who's saying this shouldn't be happening, so on and so forth. Okay? And whether or not I agree with the protests that are happening, that's not the point. Okay? Because they are expressing themselves with their First Amendment right. If they are violating any laws, like on a private campus, on Columbia's campus, guess what? They call in the cops, and because your freedom of speech on a private campus are much more limited. So if they want to call in the cops, guess what? They're going to call in the cops and get those people off of the property. But that doesn't mean that just because we see one of those instances where it feels like a university is going against somebody else's freedom of speech rights, and then it gets everybody outraged, and we start applying this to other universities as well. We get caught up in the emotional moment, and we push for XYZ policy changes because they're being mistreated, or vice versa, because people on campus feel like they're being threatened by these movements, and we get caught up in that emotion and then try to make it more restricted, whatever it may be. Just make sure you take a step back and let go of the top-line narrative. I'm going to say it for the fifth time. Let go of the top-line narrative and go for the bottom-line narrative. Remember what they're trying to change, not what emotional appeal they're using to get you to change it. All right, so that's enough on that one. Let's go into our second article, which comes from the New Republic. And it's, honestly, it's a wacky one. I'm not going to lie. The headline reads, "The Tech Baron Seeking to Ethnically Wash," I'm going to use a different word because the algorithm probably doesn't like that on YouTube, "San Francisco." And I'll tell you now, it's definitely a weird article. So it opens with a statement from a tech Silicon Valley bro. I'm going to call them Silicon Valley bros for a lot of this. It opens with a quote from, I'm gonna butcher his name. I even heard it because the podcast that they call out here where he made these statements, I actually went and listened to it, and they say his name multiple times. His name is Balaji Shirvasan. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I'm not going to pretend to be great at it. But the point here is that he actually calls for the upheaval of the San Francisco political system in order to install more tech-friendly people. You're going to have your system of identification. We're going to have people that just wear gray shirts. Those are like the technocrat kind of things. That's at least what the New Republic calls them, or calls them out on. And then we're going to still have the Republicans and the Democrats are going to be our blues and our reds. And they're saying, well, we got to be a little bit more friendly to the reds because they're still pro-business, but the blues, we're going to look at them and be like, oh, it's okay, puppy. You can still live here. We're not going to let you get any political power. At least that's how the New Republic frames it. And it is a weird article because they go on to describe what his plan is as techno-fascist. And let's be 100% clear here. His ideas are out there. They are 100% out there. Crypto/techno-fascist? I don't know. I don't necessarily know about that. Now, when there was a separate podcast that I also listened to where they kind of criticize Balaji's whole plan, where he's trying to upheave the San Francisco system and how they're trying to build, this own independent state where they can tightly control everything, so on and so forth. And I think it does definitely remind me of some, at least the network state idea reminds me of some like authoritarian countries that are technocratic in nature, authoritarian China, so on and so forth. But they do bring up a very interesting point in the other episode that I listened to where they said basically in order to flip San Francisco, all you would need is around $600 million. And it's a little bit of rough math that they're doing right there on the spot, but it's an interesting point. And my question one is $600 million to the people who are really, really rich in San Francisco. You could probably put that together very quickly. So one, why haven't they done it? Maybe because it's more complicated than just paying to make it work. Two, maybe we have more safeguards than some of these people actually give the system credit for, the tech bros, who are making these sort of comments. And three, maybe it's because the system that they're proposing would not be something that people want to live under unless you are a Silicon Valley tech person. So maybe that's why it gets a little bit of derision and why it hasn't actually come to fruition naturally, and you would kind of have to force the mechanisms there. So this sort of conversation where we have municipalities, countries, cities, there's areas where they're trying to buy up land in different countries and, start their own nation city or like a city-state, kind of like Singapore. Great. You go do you. If somebody is willing to sell you the land rights to a city and you want to create a city-state, go have fun doing it 100%. That is all on you. You want to create your own system. If you don't oppress your people, even if you do oppress your people in your own separate sovereign nation, guess what? You do your own thing. I'm going to call you out. I'm going to say, while you're coming up with a great lot of innovations, you're oppressing your people, morally reprehensible, so on and so forth. It doesn't mean that we're going to invade you or anything like that, or at least if I was president, we wouldn't advocate for that. But my point being, it is a pie-in-the-sky idea. These are the tech bros who are so disconnected. And let's be clear, I am a person who spends a good amount of time listening to national commentary. My job requires me to be involved in local stuff every once in a while, or most of the time. But I listen to a lot of national commentary, so I'm also pretty disconnected. I'll be honest. I am not the most connected person in the world to real life, so to speak. And that's not to say I don't try. It doesn't mean I don't have a life. But my point being that just like everybody else, I have my pitfalls in seeing the real world. But I can tell you now, these Silicon Valley bros are very disconnected from the real world. They are very disconnected. They are living in one of the most isolated, how should I put it? The most insulated locations throughout the entire United States, maybe even the world, of people who think along similar lines about the beauty of technology and the perfection that can be gained from it, and how there are certain systems that can just be optimized to an endless degree, so on and so forth. And these are pie-in-the-sky ideas. And I think the New Republic gives it a little bit too much credit. I won't lie to you. And if you want to go listen to some of these different podcasts, that they are all, or most of these conversations that I listen to, and also the ones that the article here calls out, besides the fact that you could just go read the article and get your idea from there. It's called something Zen. I'm going through it again. I'm going through this article. It's a little bit dense. Let me find it. Excuse me. I think Modern Zen, but I could be wrong. It is, yes, Modern Zen. And you can find it on Spotify. That's where I found it. It was most definitely, Moment of Zen. That's where I found it on Spotify. And yes, it's definitely an interesting one. There's no doubt about that. And if you want to go listen to some of these crazy tech bro out there, pie-in-the-sky ideas, go listen to it. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they fund enough of a city-state that they're able to do it. I don't see it happening. So that's why I'm not giving it much time of day. So let's jump to our Daily Delight. This one comes from Laughing Squid. Creative cat makes clay pottery with his artistic human. And I'll be honest, when I first saw this, I was saying to myself, there's no way. A cat? Come on. A cat using their paws to make pottery? No. It's just the human doing all the work. And I was wrong. The cat does a little bit of work. It has no creative vision, but it's playing around. It's cute, just like any of the other daily delights that I try to throw your way. So if you want to check out the photos or videos from that article, or read any of today's articles, they'll be in the link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, as well as Podfind, and the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.